What up, Ho Biscuits? It's your girl Skitten, back at it again. You know how when you procrastinate, right? You like push off this thing that you need to do. You're like, oh, I'll get to it. And then like, because you procrastinated on this thing, then you procrastinate on this other thing because you can't do this other thing before you do this thing because this thing really needed to get done first. So then you procrastinate on the second thing, but then that second thing needs to be done before you can do a third thing. So now because the first thing isn't done, now the second thing nor the third thing is done. And now you have a fourth thing that you want to do and it doesn't need to be done, but you want to do it, but you feel kind of guilty for doing it because like, how can you do this fourth thing that you want to do when these other three things that need to be done aren't done yet? So then you just don't do the fourth thing yet because the first thing still hasn't been done and you're not going to do it yet because it's not really the right time, but it still has to get done and it's keeping you from doing everything else. No? Does that only happen to me? And then I'm left with a list of 10 things that all need to get done. And then I'm so overwhelmed by the 10 things that I need to get done that I just lay in bed and don't do any of them because I don't have the energy. I should work on that, I think. Anti-Housins, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you guys are staying safe and sanitized. Today, we are here to watch some overly sarcastic productions. I'm pretty excited about this. We haven't visited with Red in quite some time. I've been watching a lot of Blue's videos, but I haven't been seeing a lot of Red's videos. So I'm pretty stoked to get back to the literature side of things. Today's video is called Miscellaneous Myths Actaeon? One of the two. I don't remember who this is. The name sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't actually remember. So I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty stoked to see what is going to be in this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
The major well-known figures in Greek mythology are famous for all sorts of things.
Right.
Heracles for his strength, Odysseus for his cunning, Atalanta for her speed and kick-ass Tarzan origin story, Tantalus and Sisyphus for their unique punishments in Hades, Clytemnestra for axe-murdering her husband. The list goes on. Some are good, some are bad, some are pretty cool, and some are frankly kind of embarrassing.
And they all got cheeks. They got a little junk in their trunk. Their humps, their humps, their humps. Their humps, their humps, their humps. Their lovely Greeky lumps. Check it out.
Nobody wants to be immortalized as that guy who got squished by a boat, Jason. But in the tumultuous annals of mytho-history, surprisingly few heroes are remembered only for how they died. In fact, I can only think of one, a particularly unlucky dude by the name of Actaeon. Now, Actaeon is a little tricky to talk about. Instead of being referenced in only one story or source, he's one of those guys who seems to have been kind of a meme in ancient Greece. He gets referenced all over the place, but a lot of those references are pretty light on the details, more of a get a load of this guy than a let me tell you a tale. The most complete version of his story is recounted in Ovid's Metamorphoses, but it pops up in a lot of earlier literature as a cautionary tale, typically framed as don't disrespect the gods or you'll end up like Actaeon. Funnily enough, those early references don't actually agree on what Actaeon did wrong. In Euripides' play The Bacchae back in the 400s BCE, Actaeon is cited as a hunter who boasts that he's a better hunter than Artemis, and it's a major no-no to do that in general, so he's devoured by his own hounds. But about 100 years later, the poet Callimachus says in his hymn number 5 that Actaeon accidentally sees Artemis bathing, and since it's a major no-no to behold a deity naked, he's devoured by his own hounds. Then, a little after the turn of the millennium, Pseudo-Apollodorus' Bibliotheca gives us a sprinkling of detail where it specifies that Actaeon is a hunter trained by Chiron who makes the mistake of wooing Semele, girlfriend of Zeus and future mother of Dionysus. This is naturally a bad idea, and at Zeus's command, Actaeon is devoured by his own hounds. Pseudo-Apollodorus.
So he's either a braggart, a peeping Tom, or just really, really unlucky in love. Either way, I'm so sorry, bro, that you were apparently devoured by your own hounds. Like, I'm so sorry. The betrayal that you must have felt as Fluffy and Boomer and Luna all came rushing towards you with their fangs bared. That sounds like it sucked.
naturally a bad idea, and at Zeus's command, Actaeon is devoured by his own hounds. Pseudo-Apollodorus does say, however, that this is an unusual telling, and the more popular version of the story is that, like in Callimachus' version, Actaeon's real offense is seeing Artemis bathing, at which point she turns him into a deer, and then he's devoured by his own hounds. The hounds are then confused when they can't find Actaeon and go to Chiron, who figures out the sad story from context clues and carves a statue of Actaeon so the dogs feel better about the whole situation.
Aww.
Now, we're starting to see the faintest hint of a pattern emerging here, but these anecdotal references don't really paint a full picture just yet. For one thing, they don't agree on literally anything other than Actaeon's death. Actaeon is a hunter who pisses off at least one god and is devoured by his own hounds, either explicitly at the god's orders or apparently because that's just a thing that happens. What did he do? Nobody can agree, which
not accidentally sees Artemis's Bonkana Gahoogs. How am I supposed to say that, Red? How am I supposed to say that?
God did he anger? Who's to say? How did he die? Okay, that one we've got down. Now, when discussing Actaeon, most people tend to go with Ovid's version, written in the same general 1st century CE timeframe as Pseudo-Apollodorus' telling, mostly because it is the only version longer than 3 sentences. In Ovid's version, Actaeon is, say it with me now, a hunter. He and his hunter bros have had a long and productive day of hunting, and they're packing it in for the evening and heading home. But unbeknownst to Actaeon, the goddess Artemis happens to have a private grotto nearby where she likes to go and unwind after a long day's hunting with the gals. And unfortunately for Actaeon, he happens to stumble on said private grotto right after Artemis has popped into the water for a nice, refreshing, no-clothes-needed bath. Now, as you may know, Artemis is distinguished in the Olympian pantheon as one of the virgin goddesses, whose single status was more than just a personal choice, but also actively sacred.
The first is the daughter of the Aegis, whatever, bearing Zeus, bright-eyed Athena, for she takes no pleasure in the things done by golden Aphrodite. What does please her is wars, or what is done by Ares, battles and fighting, as well as the preparation of splendid pieces of craftsmanship. The second is the renowned Artemis, she of the golden shafts. Never has she been subdued in love-making by Aphrodite, lover of smiles. For she takes pleasure in the bow and arrows and the killing of wild beasts in the mountains, as well as lyres, groups of singing dancers, and high-pitched shouts of celebration. The third one, not to take pleasure in the things done by Aphrodite, is that young maiden full of Eidos? Hestia, who was the firstborn child of Kronos. She was the lady who was wooed by Poseidon and Apollo, but she was quite unwilling, and she firmly refused.
So a dude seeing her naked, accidentally or otherwise, isn't just uncool, it's kinda also sacrilegious.
Yeah.
Artemis's nymphs freak out at the intrusion, but Artemis quickly handles the situation by hucking a handful of water at Actaeon and cursing him to silence so he can never tell anyone about this breach of her privacy. The way she does this is by transforming him into a stag, which are famously known for not being able to talk. Actaeon freaks out and bolts into the woods, but makes the rookie mistake of being shaped like a deer at the time, and every hunting dog in the zip code perks up and bolts after him. Actaeon is eventually run down and devoured by his own hounds. What a twist.
See, but first of all, I feel like Artemis didn't have to go that far. You could have just made him a mute or something. You could have, like, cut off his tongue or whatever. Like, you ain't have to turn him into a whole-ass animal. Like, I know that's your daddy, Stilo, but I'm just saying, you don't have to do that. And second of all, I feel like that means your dogs are not well-trained if they just go after whatever. You're supposed to tell your hunting dogs when to go, and then they go. They don't just go off on their own. You were bad at your job.
So, this is one of those cases where the story has a lot of recurring elements, but not every telling has all of those elements, which sometimes indicates that the story underwent an almost organic transformation and evolution over time, starting from a quote-unquote original version before branching and speciating into different versions that each retained individual parts of that original.
Got it.
But it sometimes indicates that the story was always a cluster of other very different stories with only a central point as overlap. To determine which of those things happened here, we need a broader look at the story, one that we can't necessarily find in written work, which we've basically exhausted at this point. Luckily for us, referencing Actaeon was just as popular with artists as it was with poets, and Actaeon shows up in visual media all the time, which can give us a pretty good insight into what elements of the story may have been popular at different times. For instance, earlier versions didn't seem to have Actaeon turning into a deer. In fact, visual representations from the 400s BCE up to the turn of the millennium mostly seem to show Actaeon fully human when he's chased down by his hounds. It's only around the aughts CE that there starts to be an uptick in representations where Actaeon appears to be part partially transformed into a deer during the attack. There's a painting of him in Pompeii from the 1st century BCE where he's got little antlers, but before that, he's almost always human. It's not until the Renaissance, a full 1,000 years after Rome, that the artists start leaning on the Actaeon as a deer imagery super heavily, which is also coincidentally when artists started giving us an eye full of Artemis bathing, evidently missing the entire point of Ovid's telling in the process.
Right.
Most of the earlier art also only shows Actaeon as a lone figure being killed, with no sign of which god he might have offended to make that happen. A few pieces of the art from that early Roman era feature a woman, probably Artemis, looking pretty cranky but usually, though not always, fully clothed. In some cases, other gods appear to be present, generally disapproving of Actaeon's vibes. In at least one, it looks like Artemis is chasing him down with a spear while other women are bathing nearby. So looking at all this, it seems like the reason we can't find one specific original telling to treat as the real one is because, as is so often the case, there never was one.
Right.
The only consistent thing about Actaeon was that he pissed off the gods and was devoured by his own hounds. What exactly he did, which god or gods were responsible for his death, whether or not he was deer-shaped at the time, changed. It was most commonly related to Artemis, and more commonly because of the bath, but considering the variety of tellings, it probably only got locked into the cultural zeitgeist as Actaeon copped an eyeful of Artemis's secret maidenhood and she decided not to be cool about it because Ovid's version was the easiest to access and Renaissance artists were weird like that.
It's gotta be rough dying in such a noteworthy way that it totally eclipses all the other stuff you did. Depending on the version, the moral shifts between truly the whims of the gods are a terrible thing to face to don't be creepy and you won't get devoured by your own hounds. I like that. Ask me about my Actaeon Orion conspiracy theory. Ooh, okay, but like, what is your Actaeon Orion conspiracy theory? I would love to hear it. I'm very intrigued by that concept. I'm very interested in that, Red. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I actually really liked it. I've definitely never heard of Actaeon. I've definitely, like, I might have heard his name. I might have seen him vaguely referenced, but I've never heard of that man. I've heard of a bunch of people pissing off the gods, right? Like, obviously I've heard all of the most well-known stories, but I've never particularly heard this one, which makes sense because there's like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, there's not a lot to go off of, but on the other hand, I feel like that means that it's so open, you could definitely write a video game or a book or something about it. So somebody creative, get on that. My creative juices have not flowed. Flowed. My creative juices have not flowed in quite some time, so it shan't be me, but it could be you. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave your reaction requests and recommendations down in the comments below. And other than that, peace out, Ho Biscuits. It's Skittenlit.